it is in your photos.
Putting new kits together,
Yeah.
stashing them up, dealing with used.
Well, it's good to have somebody do what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Because a lot of places aren't. I mean, it's just not that way. But a lot of
This was
just-
made before March.
Yeah.
You know, Larry's doesn't really have that much stuff.
Cause our drums are.
Well,
Hey, man.
Hey guys,
They're so
I'm
tight.
glad you all came. Go ahead and have a seat.
You can't really tell.
Matt ran off to grab something real fast, but you know we wanted to see is somebody here for me. Let's see if this guy's going. Hey there, you here for the session?
I so wish I was. I had no idea that this place was a music
What you
festival.
doing, man? What you need?
I just need to use your restroom.
Oh yeah, straight down on the
I
right.
thought this was an art museum.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
music is an art, but.
It's kind of an art museum, a different kind of
All
art.
right, well, jam out, guys.
So yeah, I wanted to just start out with a few things. Go ahead.
Where is your restroom?
Straight down the hall on the right. That'd be a help.
You go show him?
No, I'm good. Now I wanted to do this workshop because this is a very commonly asked question. How do you tune drums, right? And I guess 40 plus years of trial and error for me. I used to help my dad put new heads on his drums. I don't think he knew what he was doing. But eventually they sounded good. I think there's a lot of variables to tuning drums that people are overwhelmed with. Okay, type of heads, all the many types of heads that are out there. The types of the wood or the metal that the drum is made out of, whether it's mahogany, poplar, maple, birch, oak. They make a big difference in the sound of the drums. I think mahogany is a very low pitched wood if you're trying to go for an EQ, or if that's what you happen to have, then you're going to get a lot of lower tones. Birch is a high cutting, projecting, loud type of wood. Mahogany is more of a filler. I think they just fill it in the holes. Honestly, back in the early days of drum making, they didn't know all this. They just, whatever wood they could get, that's what they made the drums out of. Old Ludwig drums are just, nobody even knows what's in those until you start peeling them back. It's just whatever kind of wood they could get a hold of at the time, they just run through the machine. And except for the veneer, of course. So, but it makes a huge difference. Maple is a warm, I'd say a general good sound. I love a maple drum, but these factors play into how the drums are going to sound and project, etc. So, type of rims that you're using, just standard die-cast hoop, or if you get a thick hoop, the rims do bend with the drum, with the tension, depending on the amount of tension. So, cheap rims, if they got cheap drums, generally you're going to come with cheap, thin rims. So keep these factors in mind. If you're mounting the drum, like this drum is mounted like this, so that's sort of a free from the drum kind of mount, but then the Pearl drums, they have the hole literally into the drum. This affects the compression in the drum. So every drum has a hole in it to let the compression out, but a big hole changes the amount of airflow between the top head to the bottom. And that also goes for the bass drum too. If you have a mount in the bass drum, that kind of muffles the drum a little bit. Freestanding drums that don't have a mount through them like this gives you the most resonance. Of course, a lot of people don't want resonance on a bass drum, so that's not a factor. It's also a convenience factor. For me, I prefer the mount on the drum because it's just one less thing you got to worry about mounting off the stand. these are, oh, how many lugs are on the drum? If it's an 8 lug snare versus a 10 lug snare, that matters because the evenness of the tension around the drum plays into the tone. All right. So some El Cheapo drums I've noticed are 4 lugs on a tom. That's not enough lugs.
No.
That's not enough even tension to get a good tone. So you know, cheap Chinese drums, they'll cut corners to save money. So these are considerations even before you get started. You know, are my drums going to be able to even be tuned the way I want them to be? So, so starting there, I brought this little guy out of my room, not knowing who would be here today, but I wanted you to see how far we've come with tuning. This is how we used to tune drums, okay? Pulling these guys as tight as you can, which pulled both heads, by the way. And, you know, also the fact that these are skin heads makes a huge difference when it comes to drum heads in general.
How old is that drum?
This is probably mid-1800s, this one. But, you know, snare, it looks like it's seen better days. That's not even metal. That's actually some kind of twine there. So yeah, we've come a long way with the whole tuning process. The fact that they used to be calf skin is really important. Skin heads are super susceptible to weather. All right, damp, humidity in the air, dryness. If it rains, then your drum heads are going to be loose and low pitched. If you were on a hot day and you were out in the sun marching with this little guy, you're very likely to pop a head just because of the sun shining on it. So that's why Remo came out with the plastic drum head. Okay, you ever seen this emblem that says Weather King? You ever wonder what Weather King meant? Probably never thought about it. It's because they overcame the whole calf skin head thing, was no longer a variable. And even though plastic didn't sound good to the pros, a lot of pros held out and still played calf skin heads as long as they possibly could until they realized the extreme advantage of being able to not have to worry about, you know, what the weather's going to be like on the day of the gig. So Remo was the first to create the plastic head. Therefore, they are the kings. They still put that's their emblem. It's a crown. And before Evans came along, they were king of the mountain with drum heads. Their only competitor was Ludwig drum heads, which were, you know, they were okay, but I think they're completely out of business now. I don't think they even make Ludwig heads anymore.
You can buy them.
Special order.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's other smaller companies such as Aquarium, on blank on drum heads, but that, I'm trying to think of the other one that's on,
Did you say Evans?
Evans.
A
Evans.
head makes some, yeah.
Yeah.
A head.
Ahead, that's the one thing. But the two major brands are Evans and Remo still. I think Evans has long surpassed Remo. Remo hasn't been too innovative in the past 20 years. They've tried, you know, but all their CEOs are on yachts and they've made their money. So I want to kind of go into this now before we talk about the actual way to tune heads. I'm gonna kind of just send one around and just have you feel it. This one I'm holding that's a single ply head with a I guess you can say a thin head around on the inside. It kind of gives it a little thicker sound. So you can feel it. It's really important to feel the heads to see what you're working with, because a lot of times people will order these and they don't sure what they're getting. So that's was that Power Stroke? Yeah, Power Stroke 3. Okay, this head here, the CS Black Dot, was super popular in the 70s.
Yeah.
Because that dot made for like a mute a little bit. So it's really just an ambassador head with a mute. This here is an Evans Genera 2.
Didn't they call those head savers?
They might have. Yeah, they might have. I know that my dad always played those.
Oh yeah, those were big.
Yep. Here's a head that is actually a 2-ply head with little holes that let some of that air out. It makes for a real dry sound, super dry. Yeah. By letting the air out, it doesn't resonate quite as much. Here is like that Black Dot, but it's got a center. Feel underneath the head. It's a reverse dot. So that's also a way of dampening and reinforcing too. This is the head of Champions right here. This is the head I use a lot. It's just a regular coated ambassador. It's a medium thickness. Remo has 3 thicknesses: Diplomat, Ambassador, and Emperor. Right? Diplomat being the thinnest, Ambassador being the medium, Emperor being the thickest. So you can feel the coated helps control the really high overtones. This guy right here is super thick, 2-ply, pinstripe, ebony. You know, that's real common in marching band. I'm still passing them down. Yeah, just I think I passed the G2 down. This is a G1, so you can feel the thinness of that. Okay, that's a top head. I haven't handed out any bottom heads yet. Remo makes this guy right here, which is supposed to be their answer to the calfskin head. It's called the Renaissance, which only looks like a calfskin head but doesn't sound anything like it.
What's the material?
I think it's just a regular coating they put on it.
Those are great as resonant heads.
Huh?
Those are really awesome as resonant
Yeah,
heads.
I put those on as resonance,
It
but
looks a lot different than it feels.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a good old
So
school.
This is a regular pinstripe. Now I just grabbed stuff on the way out of the house. This guy right here is literally an oil-filled head. A lot of times people will think that the pinstripes have oil in them because the 2 layers of plastic refracting in the sun, you'll see a prism, and they'll think that that's oil. That's actually not. That's a 2-ply head. This actually has a little bead of oil in there, and you could actually run your finger around and see that.
That's what we had.
Yeah, that's a really deep sound when you want. This is a coated head, but it's a suede. But it's
Question: when it starts to separate, is that going bad?
I've never had oil-filled heads on a kit
The
ever.
kid I bought from Stephen Thickman, he
Yeah.
had oil head.
Yeah, so I don't even know what the.
We
what the-
replaced them because they were 20
Yeah,
years old.
they're. I don't even know. I
Drying
haven't.
out.
It's gonna compromise, like your
Yeah.
tuning.
Yeah, the plastic dry rots too.
Okay, another popular head for a long time was these fiber skin heads. Not really sure how they made these, but there is you can feel the coating on there. It looks like skin, though that's synthetic entirely. Now I'm going to show you some bottom heads. You can kind of get an idea. These are snare heads that I'm giving first. You can feel what a snare head should feel like. That one is, I say, Ambassador. So, like I said, there's 3 different thicknesses of Remo. Evans, that's called, whatever, they call it the hazy, but that looks pretty clear to me. Yep. So those are different. And you know why the bottom head of a snare has to be that thin, right? So it can get that real crisp slap back of the snare against the head. And also, the bottom head of any drum should always be thinner than the top head. Okay, so these are different thin heads. Oh, I got two of the same one. Oops. So this is me personally, I'm always a big fan of the Diplomats, Remo Diplomats, but I'll go with a Remo Resonant just as easily. So just feel those, they're pretty much the same. They're broken down into millimeters of thickness. They'll actually tell you the mil of it, but I can tell it if I'm just feeling it, if that's going to be a good head or not. And then there's this guy. I wish I brought a Power Stroke 3 bass drum head, but the two heads that I've used the most on bass drum have been the EMAD and the Power Stroke 3 throughout my playing. These haven't been around that long, but it's funny the way they're made. This is imitating what my dad used to do when I was growing up. He used to take just regular weather stripping, just like you would take, and he would just put it on the inside of the head, and that's what they actually do for a marching band. It's just regular, looks like regular old weather stripping. But then Remo came up with this idea of making a sort of a pocket for it to go in, and it's exchangeable. So you can put one thickness in, and you can see if you like that, and then they make an even thicker one to see if you like that. So I thought that was pretty genius at the time. Revolutionary.
Yeah.
So
It's great for those that don't have the luxury of having a subwoofer.
yeah. So here, so feel that. And another trick that I like for bass drums is this little guy right here. It's just a Remo muffle. I like to put a thin head on the bass drum and a Remo muffle, because then I get a lot of tone, which I'm not going to represent this very well. But to be a small drum, this thing is very thumping. Well, you've all seen a Remo muffle, but there's what it looks like. You can just hand it on down. Okay, so I want to go through that just to kind of get a feel of different drum heads. Now, Matt is going to tune this drum set, and Daniel's going to come up and talk about tuning as well. But before they do, I wanted to say a few things about the step-to-step, step-by-step how to tune. And I'll let them really just demonstrate. So, like I said, I've been tuning drums for 40 years, and most of that was by trial and error. But over the years, I've determined there are, the quick 1-2s, and there are tutorials on YouTube. You'll probably find some steps that I left out. But the way I tune a drum is, obviously, you take the old head off, put the new head on, and then you place the rim and the lugs on just nice and loose. But I give it a good old CPR, like that, before you do anything, and because that seats it real good. They're straight off the assembly line, so it gets it good and stretched before you start putting the tension on. What happens is, if you don't do that, then if you start tuning them, the very first 5 strokes that you play on that drum, you're detuning it. Okay, so you're stretching it out. Whereas if you go ahead and do it like that, my teacher used to put his full body weight on it, and I thought he was going to break it, but you won't break it. But he would put all his weight on it to get it good and seated before we even started tuning. So that's step 2, or step 3 rather. Then start putting your lugs in, tighten them finger tight, and don't go ahead and start tightening them with the drum key. Get them finger tight. So now that's your meat, that's your starting point. So after everything's finger tight, then and only then you start tightening with the drum key rather. And this is important because different drums have different amount of lugs. So early on, I used to file a start report, and I used to go this way. I didn't know what I was doing, okay? But if you start here and go this way, then what you've done is you've got the rim already down this low on this side, and this rim is already popping up real high over here. So therefore, when you finally get over here, this side's gonna be way tighter than this side. And you run the risk of warping your rims. So less of about the rim warping, although that is gonna happen if you do that, and more about even tension around the drum. So this is a 10 lug, this is an 8 lug. Most people's snare drums are 8 lugs. What you want to do, look at the 8 lug, you find a starting point. Let's just say here's the starting point. You go a quarter turn here, jump straight across, do a quarter turn over here. Then, if this was 1, this is going to be 3. Go over here, quarter turn, straight across, always straight across. 4. I started here. I messed up. 1, 2, now 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then 8. The way I think of it is, it's like odd numbers, even numbers. I don't know, it's like a circle of fifths or something. But by the time you get a quarter turn all the way around, you're pretty well in pitch. You'll want to go again, especially if it's a snare. Some people like, snares are as individual as rims on a car, okay? So you just go with what you like, really. Somebody says, hey man, can you tune my drum? I'm going to tune it the way I like, okay? So you need to tune it to where you start thinking, oh, I like that sound. I like a tight, crisp crack when I hit. I don't want any sustain whatsoever. A lot of guys like a fat, bucket, wet sound. I can't do it. There's a guy, I alternate with a guy at church, and we go back and forth every single week. I'll go into this deep sounding snare drum. I'm like, oh, I gotta retune this thing every bad blame week, because I can't even start playing until that snare drum's right. It messes me up. It just totally messes up. It don't even feel right. So, so that's like I said, super individual. 8 lug drums. Here's the pattern. You can take a picture of this. 10 lugs, which is pretty much only snare drums are going to be 10 lugs. Maybe once in a while it might be a floor tom. But rarely. And then most toms are 6 lugs. Okay. And there's the beginning of our tuning appreciation here. So I missed this little thing here in my brain. You can see this is how my brain works. I'm as AED on paper as I am in my own head. So a lot of times I can tune a drum and it sounds great, and then someone else will sit behind it and it sounds terrible. And has not as much to do with the tuning of the drums as it does the way the person is playing them. Okay, so good technique matters. It's at least 50% of the overall process. So good technique, playing with a good stroke motion, is super important to getting a good sound. All right, case in point, at the tap room, I used to let people sit in on drums, and one guy would sit in that's a great player, good technique, and my drums sound killer. And then another guy gets up there, and I'm like, what the heck happened? My kick sounds terrible, or the toms, something sounds boxy all of a sudden, thuddy, or no pitch whatsoever. And then I'll pay close attention to how they're playing. Heavy downstrokes, beater in the head will change everything about the tone of your kick. So technique is I have to just reinforce that over and over. Okay, so Daniel, when you get your drums tuned and they sound great when Matt plays them, and don't sound great when you play them, there's a connection between the stick and the drum. It's a loose connection.
It's very deep.
Yeah.
It's very meta.
So, all right, I'm trying to stay on the clock here. So Daniel, I'd like to present Daniel Reese. He's our other drum teacher. He's going to pick up where I left off.
I guess I'm gonna start with the way Rick had us passing the drum heads around. Some of us were tapping the drum heads. I think that's important to think about. I might have to get used to this. Yeah, paying attention to the resonance of the drum, or the drum head, I'm sorry, before you even put it on the drum, is key, especially if you've got really thin heads. They're not gonna have any kind of resonance to them. Some of those thicker drum heads had a little more of a low end. Let me see. So that one's really, you've got like a low pitch to it. There's not a lot of sustain, no ring to that. And even when you start to tune, you're going to be able to hear that through the drum. What I would, I feel like people tend to overcomplicate tuning drums. When you've got a kit, even if it's a cheap kit, or like you spend a lot of money on it, those shells are going to have their own resonance that you're going to want to try to find that sweet spot. You can manipulate that a little bit. You're going for like some really thunderous tom sounds, or if you're doing more of a high pitched, higher tuning on the toms. I would pretty much use the similar pattern that he's doing. A lot of times on specific drums, finger tightening is, I know on some of the Yamaha models, a little bit tougher to finger tighten. They make drum keys where you can actually turn with like 2 fingers. So you can, that'll get you your good starting point. I would really do the same tension on the top and the bottom for starters, to see how that sounds. Aside from snare drum, speaking purely toms right now, I'll get all your toms matched up top to bottom and kind of be aware of the relationship between those sizes, because that's, if you've got it all from the same starting point, you're going to have different pitches there. What's up?
You asked me earlier if I tune my drums to a specific pitch.
Mhm.
Do you do that?
If the situation called for it, if I was like recording or something like that, but not right out of the gate. I'm going off of what I think sounds best on the drum right there. You can definitely overdo that.
Didn't DW stamp inside their drums the pitch?
They've got pitches
Yeah,
on there.
Like the fundamental
shell.
tone of
The
each
pitch
shell.
of each shell.
So it's,
Yep.
instead of trying to like achieve that pitch, I want to, and this is all from trial and error. A lot of time just mess around, seeing what you can do, what you can't do, what I think sounds good, what I think doesn't. I feel like if you work through tuning methods, you're going to hear that sweet spot. That's going to be an awareness you're going to want to get for yourself anyways. The same way when you're playing the kit, whether you're bearing the beater or playing off the head on the kick drum, whether you're playing rim shots. So that kind of awareness, I think that plays a role in tuning as well. So yeah, even I would start with top and bottom head being the same. What I was gonna go for when I started touching the drum heads, the thinner heads are probably gonna have a lot more sustain right out of the gate when you've just got that same finger tension, or when you start at your starting point where they're finger tight. Some heads, if you're doing that with the snare drum, let me back up, getting ahead of myself. Hang on a second. So you've got your top and bottom head finger tight. He was talking about a quarter turn, making sure you go around across the drum, because you will definitely on triple flange hoops work the hoop if you're just going to go around this way. If you're taking like full turns, you can definitely work that. But I would start with the quarter turns, bring the pitches up on the top and the bottom. But with the thicker drum heads, you're going to see that there's not going to be as much sustain on the drum. I feel like thinner heads give you a lot of, you hear all the nuance on the drum. And also, if you're going for a lower tuning sound, I feel like the thicker drum heads are going to allow for that punchy sound with a lower tuning, and you're not going to dent the heads as easy. I don't know if you've seen somebody's drum kit. It's just got all these dents in it, and a lot of that is a technique issue, just wailing away at it. But I feel like with some of the newer stuff, Evans, they have a lot of 2-ply heads out there, and then like the remote Emperors. You can get away with lower tunings on the toms, and you're not going to be denting the head. But I would experiment. I had fun with it a lot. Growing up, I had a small bedroom with drums, and it sounded like crap. So I had to like figure out every combination I could to see what I thought sounded good. It's a Pearl Export kit, so it wasn't even that great of a kit, but yeah, experiment with trying to keep the tension the same on the top and the bottom, and then bring that up, quarter turn at a time, making sure that you went all the way around the drum. Some of your weird number lug patterns on toms, like the 4s and 5s are better, but
Gretsch has 5 lug.
yeah, they've got the 5 lug. So yeah, that can be tricky sometimes. Like the smaller ones are a little bit more finicky. This one with the 4. So let me make sure you can get some different effects after you've kind of found a good tone or a good pitch that you think sounds good for, say, this tom right here. Some people that I know, and myself, I do it in certain situations, I'll actually bring up the reso just a little bit more, and that's after I feel like I've got these matched. And I'm a big person on like, we've got these tuners, these apps you can use on your phone, these electronic tuners. I'm totally against that. I feel like,
It's a big money grab.
yeah, I
I
feel
was
like
waiting for that to come up.
yeah, I mean, I used to work in retail, so it was like anytime somebody was like, oh, should I get that? I'm like, absolutely not. Like, this is.
They used to have this thing.
Commissioner notes.
There was
Yeah.
a thing they sold called the drum dial. Remember that? It kind of was shaped like this,
Yeah.
and you tune it. In fact, they even make a drum key but
Like,
it was a total.
Yeah, it was like a feedback torque wrench.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It showed you how hard you were twisting, but if your lugs aren't properly lubricated, or if there's any type of
Yeah.
Yeah.
issue with like the male and female end of the actual threads, it's good, you're gonna get weird reading.
And that's a good point, talking about the quality or the condition of the tension rods. Using a drum key or doing finger tightening, if the thing is rusty in certain spots, they're not all gonna finger tighten the same, so you're not gonna be starting from the same point. So you wanna make sure that like the drum is prepped for you to be able to get, you know, the closest point to start from, and then kind of use your ears to make that journey with each drum and kind of see what sounds good to you. So like when you're doing the toms, I would definitely have all your toms, even if they're on the floor, be able to reference the relationship between the toms. And if you've got it just sitting on the floor, it's gonna sound dead, so you wanna lift it off a little bit, but, I was talking about raising this up a little bit, raising the top head up a little bit, or no, raising the bottom up a little bit. You can actually get, if you've got them matched up on the batter and reso side, and you were to drop the reso a little bit, you can get some like growl, some extra overtone properties that some people like, some people don't. God, there's so much to like unpack here with what you can do. With the snare drum, I would start with your the bottom head. Do you ever do the press thing with your reso head? Cause I've never done that.
They
just
usually
because of how
already come-
thin-
they
I
Yeah,
would recommend that.
because of how thin they are, so I don't think I would do that.
Lindsay, I wouldn't probably.
Yeah,
The tension's high enough that it'll get it done.
exactly. And what I was gonna say is that out of any part of the kit, I feel like that, crank that thing up.
It'll be a terminal tension for sure.
Yeah. You can definitely overdo it.
I've busted more snare heads than any other head.
Yeah.
The bottom, not top, but bottom, just not, and also, not just from tuning it, but because the way I set it back down on the
Oh, yeah.
snare stand.
Yeah.
I'll set it down and pop it with the,
Used to do that in marching
with the
band.
stand itself.
Yeah.
Our snare players have dropped.
Well, yeah, that's the only thing that has
Many bottom snare
something
heads.
touching it.
Yeah.
So you have metal on plastic, so it's,
That
Cool.
one, I feel like you want to crank that thing up. What's really cool when you've got that snare reso head way up in tension, if you finger tighten the top head, depending on the head you're using, I'll use the Remo Ambassador, and then I'll use the Remo Coated Emperors, and then they've got like an X14 Remo, which is a little bit thicker Ambassador, it's like a 14 mil. Even from the finger tension, you'll get like a decent sound. It's a very low end, like, I don't know, contemporary Christian vibe, like smack, like a low end thing. But you can, if you start with that bottom head being under a pretty good, really tight, almost like tabletop, that bottom head just barely gives when you apply pressure to it. I just kind of work my way up with that method, whatever lug count you've got, making sure you're going across.
Whose
I feel like
acro,
you-
whose acro is that?
I think it's
Acro.
school.
So that sounded really good. So how did you tune it? To my ear, I think it sounded really good. Both heads high?
Yeah, those Acrolytes are really cheap drums. Those student model intro level
Everybody loves
drums.
them though.
But, and I've never heard an Acrolite not crack. They just have a real, and I think it's got to do with the metal, the type of metal they use. I think they've changed it over the years. I don't think that's the same as those gray pewter looking drums. But they don't have much ring, and yeah, I don't think they sound good unless they crack.
They are responsible for the stereotype of loud middle school drummers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what they put in everybody's hands.
Yeah.
So here's the loudest,
This is
most
where all the drum
obtrusive
jokes
snare drum
start.
you could ever put.
It's probably sacrilegious to actually strip that gray stuff off of an acrolite.
Well, yeah,
It's
that's
just an aluminum.
that's a whole new conversation.
So the difference between the 8 and the 10 lug, are both of those 14-inch?
Yeah,
Okay.
the quality's very different though.
Vastly different.
Intro level quality of Ludwig. I mean, Ludwig never made anything super cheap, not like the CF700s.
Just the hardware.
But it's like a baseline starter snare. But when they upped it to the 10 lug, everything else is better quality too. You're guaranteed to have a better throw off, and that's a thicker rim, you can see.
Yeah, even though they're both triple flange, this is definitely a more heavy duty triple flange hoop. Is there any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
The depth of the toms, what does that do to?
You gotta think about, you've got more air traveling through the shell of the drum when you play it. So I feel like, talking about how that applies to tuning, or like, I mean, I'm still,
Yeah, they've changed over the years. Like these are, I wouldn't necessarily call these power toms anymore. are they?
These were, yeah, in the middle of the transition
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
the power to the hyper. But I think, you look at the difference between the tone quality of a snare drum, if you turn the snares off in order to tune it like a tom, versus a 14-inch floor tom. Obviously the deeper the drum, the more wood you have. Think about bars on a xylophone, the bigger the bar, the lower the fundamental tone.
yeah.
So you're getting a lower pitch with a deeper drum. But then you're losing your sustain and tone, so you're getting lower bottom end punch, but then losing your resonance. Whereas if you had really shallow toms, you get more of your ping pong.
That's been a new thing. Those
Yeah.
fast toms they call them.
Because you can tune them really low and still get a really good resonance.
Cool. All right, Daniel, thank you.
Yeah, man.
All right, Matt's gonna now put it.
Cool.
Put it to work.
Yeah, so everything that they cover is the baseline for everything that you should do when you're looking at changing heads, tuning heads. Because obviously there's more choices, I think, in drum heads than there are like actual drum sets, types of wood. I'll pass around what I have here. This is the 8. And this is the Evans resonant head, and then the UV2 on top, which is the 2-ply. And I like it because it was sort of a hybrid between the Mylar clear head and the coated you have. You can see the Mylar is exposed on the actual bearing edge. So where it's touching the drum itself,
What is that?
you don't have contact with the coating. And I get the 2-ply. I don't necessarily like 2-ply. The 1-ply sound better, but I feel like the 2-ply just gives you that little extra layer of durability. A lot of my students play this kit, so they will thrash it. So I feel better about allowing them to do that. Okay, and I've got the EMAD here who's showing you the external mounting thing.
It has no hole.
And what I like about the EMAD is that it gives you kind of an EQ'd sound. For the most part, if you get just like a normal 2-ply head or something like that, you're putting a lot of muffling into the bass drum, and that's fine because then you can mic it up and your subwoofers would supplement the bottom end that you want. So you can literally have a bass drum that sounds like a cardboard box, and then the subs will You just boost up the frequencies that you want. We don't always have that luxury. I want something that sounds good. So kind of the best of both worlds. That front head was like one of those custom drum art things, and there was a band name that has been out of existence for over a decade. So I just threw a bunch of paint on it. So it's got an entire vinyl piece of plastic on there, and then it's painted with like a thick layer of paint. So it ended up being a really thick, like muffled, I'm avoiding having to put things inside the bass drum. So I have just 2 regular towels in there. And a bass line from that, you start from, you know, resting the actual rim onto the head that's on the bearing edge. And I get all of my lugs started, just like they said. But for a bass drum, you can see it's super loose. It's just to the point where there's no wrinkles. The resonant head of the bass drum is probably the only resonant head that I have tuned lower than the top. Everything else would be higher. Bottom head higher. So I just think opposite. And then same thing, this is pretty loose too, but a little tighter, so I have some response. If you bury the beater, you don't like this kind of kit, but so being able to have that tone, and then if I want to remove those towels, like that would be if I'm playing with an actual sub, it's a little more choked. And if I move the towels away from the heads. And this is for, you know, like a rock cover band. I mean, this is for slamming and jamming. And that's without the towel, so I get a little more towel. So, I mean, it's just a really easy way to throw on a bass drum head and have options, and then have an easy, it's kind of a no-brainer. As long as you get rid of the wrinkles, you have equal tension. Okay, so I'll show you the process here of exactly what you would do. We talked about it. I think seeing it will help. This is my process. And as far as tuning pitches, I'll show you a little bit more of that when I get closer. I don't know why I bring it over here. Let's not bring that. Wrong item. Okay. Got this handy dandy little attachment here that came with an old school Remo djembe, because it had super recessed lugs, so you had to have like an actual ratchet.
for it.
So it has a drum key attachment. Great for marching band. So you very easily just get things out and started. All right, so I mean that would be the idea there. And I have 3-in-1 oil. I use something that's synthetic, never WD-40, or you can use Vaseline, something like that. But something that is like petroleum based or synthetic based. You don't want this stuff to rot. WD-40 is fish oil. So it's something to break up something and break up old lubricant, nasty oil and grease.
Made-
And then you replace it
made by
with
NASA.
actual grease. It is. But it's water displacement. So fish oil is the best thing to displace water. And then rust is, you know, science.
Patina.
It's oxidized water. All right, so anyway, so you would start with that. You would remove the head. You can see you want to make sure that your bearing edge is free of any debris. Contrary to any like commentary you've heard, don't like take any sandpaper or abrasives to the bearing edge. I've heard people say that, and I walk away because I don't want that kind of negativity in my life, and they're probably psycho murderers. Okay,
And
so
I will
as far
probably have
as
to say
like,
something.
you know, you place your head on there, and you know, before I actually put any weight on it, I'll get these lugs down to the point where they're touching, like not even finger tight. Kind of get them started. This makes it so much easier. Nobody got time for nothing else. Okay, so I'll literally just to where the washers don't spin anymore. You know what I mean? So really being super ridiculous about it, because once you get it started, you can make adjustments, but the closer you are, the easier and faster it goes. My regular key. obviously we're not doing any fine tuning with the power drill. Power tools are not usually something you would use around a kit. Oh, and another thing I forgot to mention, make sure that everything, all your hardware inside is tight while you have the thing open. Because things just rattle loose. You know, you don't want it to over torque those things, but you want to make sure that they're all about the same. If you feel one that's looser than the others, make it match the ones that are not loose. Okay, so that's touching, and at that point you kind of have a little bit of resistance on that rim so you can lay into it. And if it is a legit coated head from, you know, all the way from the edge, you'll hear a lot of cracking and popping. There's glue and things in there. Even like the G2s will crack really
Yeah.
loud. It'll scare you.
Remo
Scared of-
was set into a bed of glue,
Yeah.
okay? I think they mostly all, well, some of them are crimped
A
now.
lot of them are now. Yeah.
But Ludwig, that was their thing, their marketing thing, that they weren't in glue, they were crimped, they were pulled around. So they used to slam Remo because the drum heads used to come pull out of the glue, which did happen once in a while. But anyway, that's
Yeah, a lot of that's from
why
like
that popping and
UV
cracking.
or dry rotting of that
Yeah.
glue, or if it's in the heat or something like that, it degrades the adhesive. All right, so yeah, we're touching. Everything's nice, kind of like, you see what I mean? So not even start with any tension, and then I'll just kind of go through with a half turn. And here I'm just doing a regular star pattern since it's, you know, 5 lug. Right? And you can feel it as you are, like I can feel that this one felt like it took a little more, so I'm gonna kind of match how it feels. And these are already like freshly lubricated, so that's kind of a good starting point. And along the way, I will still just make sure that that's seated. Like any given time you're pushing down, you wanna make sure that the rim of the head is pushing up. And sometimes it's not exactly symmetrical, you know? You can go around again, like you can kind of put your hand out, you can actually feel like wrinkles and soft spots, and then as you tighten them, you kind of feel them go away. And once you feel like you're sort of at a baseline, you know, you can, these are about the same tension, and we're getting lower, it's about the same. These guys are a little low, and I could feel that when I was turning it. Alright, so this one's still high. I'm gonna kind of match the highest one that's there. And then again, you can go like this and see, right, it's still,
So, some guys on YouTube will say to put a stick in the middle of the head and then go around and tap. I
mean,
never
you
used
can-
to do that. Yeah, I used to do it more like that.
yeah. And it's however, you know, you're getting, trying to get to the same place. You know, there's a lot of different ways to sort of go after this, but like, yeah, I can feel that like this side is just a little, like not as much. So sort of, and that's what some of those drum tensioners do, like they'll feel, they're just a weight that's pushing down on it, and they'll feel how much it's sinking down from the contact point. Like there's a little thing in the middle that drops down, and then however far it drops from the outside of the rim. So that's all I'm doing is kind of feeling how much resistance there is. And then you can hear it. Like this side's still really low. Alright, so that gives me sort of a starting point. And you can hear the bottom head is already in, and it's a little bit higher than the top. And you know, the science behind that, you really think about sound waves as behaving like water, and they're subjected to like friction and air resistance, so things slow down as they travel. So if you think about the tone and the resonance and the frequency of the top head traveling through the drum will slow down a particular amount, and then if the bottom head is a higher pitch, it will then support and lift up that pitch. It'll maintain the pitch. Whereas if it's the other way, you'll get those lower, like you'll hit a tom and it'll go, pew,
Yeah.
pew, like the pitch will drop. So yeah, I just think about keeping up the momentum of the energy is kind of the idea behind the higher resonant head. And that gives you just a more focused tone. See if it actually sounds good after all that. And then I tune my toms usually to fourths, and it depends. If you just have 2 toms, it's just high and low. You tune the drums, you know, it depends how much you spend like chugging them together. You know, you don't wanna have like nasty, crunchy, half-step sort of vibes coming from your only two toms. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in between. If you're worried about like half steps, then you're dealing with, you know, octaves and separating that far, where you can at least get a drum to be a third or a minor third away from another drum. Lumber. Wow.
Got some up there.
Call it lumber, it makes me feel like it's more expensive. Okay, so that's the one I just tuned, and it was really pretty basic. I'm just making sure that it was the right kind of thing. This is a maple drum, so they are more based on kind of tone than they are punch. This was a really cheap drum set. They did a promotional thing where they were all maple, so I snagged it. I got this in like 2006. So, and I basically did the top head just into spec, and just to the point where it's not wrinkling and that I'm getting a consistent tone where it's not dead. And then you can hear that it's just kind of sturdy. I could adjust up and down if I wanted to tune this drum up. I have a little bit of leeway. You know what I mean? If I need to kind of see, I can muffle the top. That's my tone there. Right, it doesn't even sound good as far as like how they would mix together. They're kind of dissonant, but you know what I mean? It supports the actual energy that's moving through. So, right here comes the bride. That was a little out. That one's low, you can hear.
Sometimes you can finagle it.
Did y'all
without
understand
putting
when it
it
said, "Here comes the bride"? That's a perfect fourth.
Yeah.
Here comes, boom, boom.
So that way when they're played together, they have, and if you go down, you have an octave. And then I like to have, you know, a fifth between my floor tom. You know, think Star Wars or what's another one. Or an octave if you can pull it off. So that's sort of the idea. So they have, and this particular setup I have with the sizes, these are the fusion sizes. So back in the day, they've changed. Now it's like 10, 12, 16, right? And then they have 12, 13, 16. Those are like your two different,
Yeah.
your rock and fusion. So it used to be 10, 12, 14 was your standard fusion kit. And then you had your rock kit was 12, 13, 16. And then that's with the idea that you would expand. So if you had a fusion kit, you had a 10, 12, 14, you could get an 8, you can get a 16. And then you could very easily have the ability to spread like a fourth across that many drums. Whereas if you did a rock kit, 12, 13, they're assuming you're gonna do the big double kit. So you'd have like a 10, 12, 13, 14, 16, and then maybe an 8. You know what I mean? Having the 2, 4, 6 toms. And then those would be more like, I don't know, minor thirds or thirds up top, and then maybe fourths, because then you run out of space. Because then you're just like, or ting, you know, so you kind of.
Unless you're Terry Bozzio.
Yes.
Chromatic drum set.
But the setup here, I play a bunch of cover tunes played by drummers that have many different configurations. So like a 5-piece kit was kind of the normal, that sort of thing. So I have that, and then I have my 12 to the left because now it's kind of a standard 4-piece kit. You know what I mean? So you have kind of your bottom setup, and then you have like your more modern rock setup. And then that's just a bonus. It's like a reverse set of tenors. But this is what I use to play cover stuff. So the coated head to give me a little bit of muffling, so I still get the warm maple tone without having to like put a bunch of moon gels or tape. I see I have a little bit of gaff tape over here to calm down this floor tom. And that's so I can keep it low without it giving me that wash, that weird like spread. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Snare, I mean, the same exact sort of thing. I'll kind of show you the tension that I have in the snare. It's up there. Ooh, see? And then this is just normal maintenance too that I'm going through. I thought I would have had to tune the rest of them, but I really didn't. It was just kind of that 8 that was a little wonky. They sell the things, you know, where you can lock the lugs and all of that. And of course, when you lubricate your tension rods, they're gonna shake out easier. You know what I mean? So they're not gonna be held in there by friction as easily. So when you beat the crap out of them, they will loosen. And then the heads do stretch over time too. Like if you are really playing on these things, the plastic will stretch. And then you'll notice that, like, you know, you'll tune it, and then when you take the head off, then all of a sudden you have a bowl of oatmeal. You stretch that balloon out, and it's, you know what I mean? So it's stretched unevenly in the middle. So yeah, we'll bring that back up. Back up in the spec.
So he's lifting the snares off the head so you can hear the pitch
Yeah, I'll
of the
just
drum.
kind of release it and sort of hold it up. And then put it back down. Don't do that. See, that's why the bottom heads, man. They're vulnerable. The kids want to bang on the snare, like the actual snares, and like, ooh, yeah, no.
I had a student one time said his snare head busted, but it's cool. He just turned it upside down. I was like, don't just don't tell
Now
me
you gotta
that.
buy 2 heads.
Yeah.
It's a little out of whack. I beat the crap out of it for 2 nights. So, okay. So I mean, pretty basic. It's not anything wild. It's loud enough or high enough to get a good crack. And once again, I use just a little bit. This is actually like striking tape, or what do they call that? They use it for the theater.
Gaff.
Is it striking? You strike something, or you spike tape? Where you put like where props are supposed to go.
Oh, yeah, I don't do theater.
Like if that's supposed to go right there, I'd put spike tape around the feet. That's where I found it. You know, and something that complements what you have. And that's the idea. I wanted to have a nice, loud, poppy snare, and then something that's still gonna give me a decent tone if I'm not laying into rim shots. But I can play pretty quiet.
One thing I wanted to add that we didn't touch on, I'm sure Matt you can elaborate on this, and Daniel, is tuning at your house. They might sound one way, and then you get to the gig and they sound entirely different because
Yeah.
the room has a lot to do with tuning, and also whether you're going to be mic'd or unmic'd. Most of my gigs anymore are unmic'd, so I like a lot of resonance on my drums
Yep.
because I'm not mic'd. But if you're mic'd, there's a lot of
This would
feedback.
be bad. Yeah, this
Oh,
would be
yeah.
Yeah.
horrible.
That's
for a sound
always
man.
been a feud between sound men and drummers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. When a sound man
Bring a
comes
roll
up
of
to
duct
me with
tape.
a roll of gaff tape and goes, I'm like, you don't.
Because it just amplifies the ring.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then quality of drums. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, to your point, and Daniel and I were talking about this when I walked in. I played last night. This stuff drives me crazy. You know, you're talking about tuners, and I've got how many snare wires in my room and heads I keep changing. It drives me crazy. So not only does it sound different when I take it somewhere else, snare drums mostly, it feels different.
Mhm.
It's almost like it's fighting me. You know,
Yep.
where it's bouncing in it's giving me a good, feel to my stick in my drum room, and then I take it somewhere, it sounds terrible, and it's almost like it feels terrible.
Is it a wooden drum or a
No,
metal?
it's a metal. I mean, it could be any number of drums.
So I think of it like a race car. Like you're in your same car, but you're in a different, uncomfortable. The conditions are different. The temperature's
Yeah.
different. The road.
So you would feel comfortable making
Track.
adjustments. Now I'm lost, because I'm.
Yeah, you get better.
So I always
it's-
bring 2 snare
it's
drums. That's
mileage.
one thing.
Yeah, it's mileage, dude, because you get more adaptable. Like I used to just totally break down if I didn't have to play my own kit.
Yeah.
I can't.
Right.
Now I can sit down on anything and like after just a couple of minutes, you get acclimated.
So in
you
your
play a
snare-
drum different sometimes to make it sound better in a particular room.
On your snare, so it sounds like you're higher on your reso and your tom. Are you table tight like they were talking about on
Yeah, I
there?
mean, it's pretty up there, and it could be tighter, but I find like that when I go too tight, the snare gets a little too wet.
And do you
It's
keep
not-
your wires just above where they're not
Yeah.
buzzing? So you're
Yeah,
not
making
choking?
sure that like very minimal tension, if you're having to crank your wires, to get the snare to be dry, then you either have a wonky bottom head, messed up snare bed, stretch snares.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing we overlook a
String
lot.
versus plastic.
Cause if you over tighten this thing and then crank this lever up, you're stretching that, I mean, it's a spring. And then
Yep.
some of them stretch and some of them don't, so some of them are longer than the others, so some of them are always floppy. So the first thing I do if I can't get a good snare sound and I replace my head, like I'll replace the actual snare wires, it's super cheap.
Yeah.
And it's something we overlook. Yeah.
Only reason I asked you if it was wooden versus metal.
Mhm.
Wood is the only variable
Yeah.
that you can't change
Yeah.
between humidity and
Yeah.
dry.
I'm
I mean,
almost all metal. I do have one wood, I don't play it, but, so, but it does, I mean, again, I was telling Dan, it's almost like golf to me. It's so frustrating. Tuning, it can be frustrating. And I walk, like I told Rick one time, I love how these classic maples are tuned. I don't know if you spend a lot of time on that.
they were very easy to tune.
There's various resos on there. One's a Ludwig heavy. Who knows what that is? It's a double ply.
I didn't-
And it's the one and only drum set that has a 12 that actually resonates because it's more shallow.
Yeah.
Because I have so much trouble with this tom, like the standard sizes where it's like graduated sizes. I always have that weird.
For me,
even
it's a
my other
13.
kit.
I've
Yeah.
got a graveyard of 12s and 13s at home, a shelf, I call it the graveyard.
But like we said, like this is more of a hyper, like it's more resonance. So it's like the best sounding
That's a
12
great
I've ever
drum,
heard
man.
in my life.
There's variables that we didn't talk about too, like the bearing edge and how it's cut, the
Yeah.
the shape of it. Some are round bearing edges, some are steep. I mean, there's a lot of science that's been gone into it.
Jonathan Green, Colin Green,
Yeah,
he has the same exact kit, but you have the bearing edges cut,
yeah.
and it's a totally different. It's like
Yeah.
night and day. It sounds like a
Yeah.
birch kit.
Yeah.
Because it's just
Yeah.
you brought that bearing edge down.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing with deciding what kind of heads. Like if you throw just a regular UV2 on here with no muffling onto like a poplar drum set, it's gonna sound bad. It's gonna sound very papery, airy.
Yep.
You're not gonna have the warmth of the maple. So, a lesser quality drum, you would wanna use something more like an oil filled or a pinstripe or something that's gonna actually like provide some of that tonal control.
Mhm.
Cause the overtones are what get wild with cheaper quality wood.
The thickness of the shell has become a new trendy thing too. Sorry.
Which changes the tone also.
It change-
It's like
changes the
thicker
tone.
the drum, the
Yeah.
higher the pitch.
Exactly. Like drums used to be really, really thin back in the 50s, 40s and 50s. So, of course, they didn't know the science behind anything they were doing back then. It was all trial and error. But over time, like in the 80s, they got really thick, 10-ply almost. So then they started deciding the combinations of wood changed too. Like I got a Pearl Masters work at home that I customized every drum to be a different combination of wood, because the wood is the EQ of the drum. So the bass drum is all maple and mahogany, whereas the toms are more birch. So, I mean, that's when you're getting into like really customizing things, but just knowing what the wood what its potential is.
And then the science behind like the hybrid shells. If you have two different wood grain densities, the sound is trout, so you could sell it both ways. Where if it were all maple, it's like exactly the same wood density. The sound wave is unwavering from the actual, organic sound. And then like if you had mahogany and walnut or something, you'd have like a hard wood and a softer wood. So it's like it would attenuate or slow down or change. And they can say it's their special proprietary
The
blend,
blend.
with sound wave
Oh, they-
adjustment.
Oh, they're,
So I mean, it's literally,
They're
it's
baristas.
all, you know, subjective.
Where does the beechwood fall into maple, birch?
I mean, it's kind of more on the birch side. mean,
I would say it's
harder.
more birch
Is
or,
that-
it's
that
a
beechwood we have
punchier-
is huge, huge sound.
Yeah,
But
that
it's
was
what-
like, because they had the
it's
Beach
big.
Custom Yamaha had.
yeah, they
was
project,
Really big for.
they're big,
So that would be like a live, you know, like something you would see in an arena kind of setup. Big screen.
are they big toms?
Yeah, 12, 13, yeah, no, 12, 13, 16,
Yeah.
yeah, they're big.
I've never played small tom beach drums, but they've always been big.
Yeah,
Which is her kids, maple,
Mhm.
12, no, it's 10, 13,
Yeah.
16, yeah.
and they have like those oak drums that are just cannons.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they're like
And
their
they weigh as
drumsticks.
much as cannons too.
Yeah.
Very heavy.
But yeah, and then a little spiel on technique, like I used to have, you know, really, I would go through heads in, you know, a month or two, and I'd play, you know, a few gigs a month, and I would buy new heads all the time, because I was beating the crap out of them. So what really changes is, you know, kind of reversing the idea of, you know, using tension on impact and then reversing that movement. So allowing, so now you're actually like, you think about your hand being like an artillery weapon, and then this being the shell, you're releasing the shell, and then the chain, you know, the recoil is allowing, it's allowing for the recoil to come back, and then the chamber resets. So it's more like the basketball yo-yo instead of closing the door. You know what I mean? And really for joint health, but you can see all that energy, and because we're dumping it into our connective tissue and all the sensitive areas in here, it's reflecting down in through the drum, instead of back into the actual stick and the forward upward momentum. And it happens in like a super split millisecond. So it's a reversal of kind of like the natural movement thing.
Call that?
And that's the other drawback of the marching technique. I mean, it's a lot of that finger stuff where you'll play eights like this all day, to really develop that. But as far as your normal playing, I mean, this is literally just like
Catching all of that.
crashing your bicycle at full tension. Like, you know what I mean? You think about the whole idea of being relaxed on impact and generating a technique that supplements that need, for just the longevity of your connective tissue and also your sticks and your drum heads. Like, I'll keep the same drum heads, I will beat the ever living crap out of them, and I'll keep them for years.
I used to put the dates on my heads. I used to like the month and the year, just to see how long. And I still have heads from the early 2000s. They still sound great.
Yeah. And even in a downstroke, like as you're doing that, like I'm not squeezing and dumping, I'm allowing that, like I'm stopping my hand and the stick is like doing its thing. My hand is just stopped. You know, so really relaxing on impact, that's kind of the very first thing to start drawing your attention to be
And-
mindful about.
Can I piggyback off of that?
Yes, please.
You're gonna hear that on the drums.
Yeah.
Especially, say you're at home, drums sound great, you take them out to the gig. Yeah, the room's different, but if you've got that extra like
Tension and anxiety.
tension and anxiety, that's gonna come through in the kit.
Yeah.
Because you're stopping, you're catching all of that energy in your hands and
Yeah,
wrists.
laws of nature. I mean, a forced, tense movement is going to create a forced, tense sound. And a relaxed, fluid, open, comfortable movement is going to create sounds with the same adjectives. But yeah, another pro tip: when you get nice, new, fresh drum heads, be mindful of the sticks that you throw down on them. Right? If you use nylon tip, like, don't go banging on cement with them, and then they're all like chewed up, and then you bang on your nice new drum heads you just spent $400 on or whatever, and they're done. So fresh sticks, when you have, it's just going to make your drum heads last longer, because you're hitting them with, all of that energy is being focused on that point into your investment. That is worse every time you hit it. You know what I mean? It's a
Oh, yeah.
never do. You know what I mean? As soon as you hit it, it's like, okay, it's never gonna sound the
So
same.
a chewed up wooden tip isn't gonna suddenly become smooth
Right,
on a new head.
yeah, so.
It's
I mean,
gonna
that's-
chew up the coating and all that, which, yeah.
Yeah, that's why
it's a
you
good
see
point.
like tenor players banging on like the cement bleachers.
Oh,
Or
God.
like, you know what I mean? Like on the concrete sidewalk, like, stop.
Do you do that?
Never.
Do you keep
Not anymore.
the sandpaper for the nylon tips?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can get really just like 220 grit or something and
Yeah.
really smooth it out. We've done that with the tenor, like the hybrid tenor mallets.
So nylon versus wood tips.
Really, the only difference to me is on cymbals with the
Yes.
nylon tips, and then if you, I don't know, if you end up cracking your wood tips a lot, I usually look and check, I'll go through several different sets of sticks and make sure I don't have too tight of a wood grain in some of the tips, because a lot of times they'll just cleave. But yeah, I mean, it's wood, so you're dealing with that. The nylon's good, but then, like, you have to keep an eye on it, because the
Nylon breaks.
nylon is sharp.
I mean, they've gotten better with nylon tips over the years, better quality plastic, I guess you can say. But when I was growing up, they were 50-50. You know, you could split, those nylon tips would come off
Yeah.
the very first time you play them. And then when that happens, then you're basically playing with a sharp edged drumstick.
Yep, and you're Morgan Rosen.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. But yeah, so for that reason, I've never been a nylon tip person. I just don't trust them.
Yeah, and like I would use them if I needed, like in a theater production where I need like stick definition at a lower volume. You know what I mean? Because it'll make the definition louder, but the wash won't be as loud in comparison. So it's kind of like a reverse compressor. But yeah, purpose-built kind of things for me would be nylon tips. I don't know, maybe the weight is sometimes a little bit different if you try it versus
Yeah.
the wood version and the nylon version. Like you
I don't
said,
like the
different
rebound
balance thing.
of nylon. Nylon has a funny, it just feels,
Yeah,
weird.
Yeah, I'm a traditionalist. I like the all organic kind of wood drums, wood sticks. I mean, plastic. This is Coke bottle plastic. You guys know it's the same plastic that they use in drink bottles. Made in the same factory on Long Island.
no kidding.
Yeah. So they pump out these sheets of Mylar in all different thicknesses, and then manufacturing companies make all kinds of things out of it.
Mm. Cool. All right, guys, we have any questions? I know, Daniel, you got a tuning after this, and I think that's a wrap. Put them on. Can you give us a big drum fill?
Thank
Awesome.
you guys very much.
Thank you. I've recorded this, so I'll probably